So, Lyndsay, thank you so much for joining me in chatting about agile assortment planning in times of change, because wow, are times changing. And it's an understatement, in fact, to say, right? All the registrants of the webinar would have, as they registered, would have been asked a question, and their opinion, or at least thoughts or actions that they've taken for their brand on navigating recent or upcoming tariff changes. And the results are here. And my first instinct as a merchandise planner, I was like, these numbers do not add up to 100, but they're not supposed to. This was just, what have you done? And a number of them have done multiple things so far with tariffs. So just having a look at these, we've obviously changed fulfillment model, coming in at 45%, but the winner being adjusted pricing strategy to offset increased duties, 73%. Does that surprise you? It kind of comes instinctually, doesn't it?
It does. I think it's inevitable given what's happening out in the world. And, I think it's something that people have been doing and looking at. We've been dealing with inflation and, coming off of COVID, I think a lot of brands have been reassessing, and this is just kind of another factor in that playing field.
Totally. Another big factor. And it's our biggest lever, right? So I understand people are pulling it soon. And then followed by, we haven't made any changes at 38%. That's quite a bit. I almost respect that in a number of ways, just thinking about how to react to something, that changes the game for what we do in business. You can't knee jerk. There's probably a big risk and a mistake.
Right. I think, I'm sure we'll get into this, but, making really data informed and decisions is super important. And depending on where your brand sits in the marketplace and your customer's demographic, it might not be to your benefit to make any changes just yet. You might need to see what happens and, read the results before you decide what your strategy is going to be going forward.
Yeah, totally. Because we're talking globally, and the different options for the different retailers, depending on where they're shipping to, where they produce from, their main kind of countries of business, huge impact. So, and then the last two, in fact, 40% are shifting sourcing or manufacturing locations and renegotiating with supplier. Yeah, quite a number of people doing that, which not unexpected. And then enhanced customer comms or checkout messaging around duties. Are people nervous to do this? This is changing as we speak, right? So that's interesting that's quite low.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one of the most important factors as we think about what the impact of the tariffs is going to be is staying really close to your customers and, understanding what their perception of what you're doing and what your strategies are, whether it's product pricing, the customers are the ones who are going to vote yes or no to whatever decision you make. So staying really close to them is important.
I know. It's almost like they lead the way in times like this. You got to follow what they're doing, and we're all trying to predict what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So very interesting. And I'm sure this graph will change over the coming weeks as well. So that's certainly one to watch. But just to introduce the two of us today, Lyndsay, let me introduce you first. This is obviously such an honor to be speaking today. Lyndsay Houser Lees, dialing in from New York too. So we're both NYC based, and I guess take it as almost like a local take on some very global challenges that we're facing in retail. And Lyndsay comes from an omnichannel merch background as an executive with over 20 years of experience across e-com and retail. And her background spanning, luxury, wholesale, outlet, specialty, and then across men's, women's, accessories, and runway. So to me, we couldn't be speaking to anyone more experienced in this space, with obviously the incredible companies, Lyndsay, that you've worked for. I was looking at them. It's almost like, medals of valor sitting there. I mean, you're talking Ann Taylor, Ralph, Tori. So you have really seen it all. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for that very lovely introduction. I'm so super excited to be here and to be working with you and your team and having this conversation. They are like medals of valor every single year of my career. I've definitely seen it all, and I'm excited to kind of talk through with based on my experience, what I think we should all be thinking about right now.
Yeah. It's incredible. So we're all here to lean on your director level expertise and dive into some important merch topics, because that's at the heart of the entire business in retail. So yeah, thank you. And then just as a quick intro on me, like Lyndsay, I spent, I won't give you the number of years, but the majority of my career in retail, and working across, different large global organizations, as well as the fast growing ones in e-commerce. So players like The Iconic, where you'll see, roller coaster ride of triple digit growth. That was incredibly fun. And then all the way through to the very efficient, well-oiled machines of established department store retailing. So working at a retailer that had 700 stores across Africa was really eye-opening for me. And I think one theme throughout my career has been, as Lyndsay probably too, like we're incredibly passionate about merchandising, right? Because it's such a needle mover for us. But I'm sure you will agree that we were never satisfied with the systems that we had to work with. So that was a theme certainly in my career. Hence, starting Style Arcade as the CEO and co-founder of the business 7 years ago. So yeah, that's kind of my journey to today. But yeah. Awesome. So then let's have a look at our content. So here we're talking about navigating assortment planning through tumultuous times. Let's not beat around the bush, tumultuous times. So Lyndsay, the content team pulled this graphic for us from The Guardian. And just looking at that and the key events and market dips, right? And I don't know about you, but looking at this, we have ridden a number of these waves. And it almost surprised me and made me feel a little bit better about the situation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think if you see the impact of COVID, which, still feels very real and fresh in a lot of our minds, and, what the impact of the tariffs that are currently being implemented would be in comparison to that, that's super refreshing. And, I think if we talk about, how businesses are planning for this, I think it's about being agile. It's about, to your point, being data informed, having the right systems and the right people in place to make the decisions. And I think contingency planning is super important, and making sure that as you're thinking through, your strategies, you have a plan B, because as you mentioned in the beginning, these decisions on the tariffs are changing every day. So, you have to be prepared for your business and your customers' response to change as frequently as well, which is kind of part of what we do. I mean, that is the business of retail and of assortment planning.
I couldn't agree more. I actually used to say to people, they're like, what is it like in retail? I said, it's addictive, because every single day is different. It's never, ever the same. And I know none of us would like this kind of change every day, but it is what we're used to in retail. There's a lot of change in our roles on a daily basis. Yeah. And I think because there's so many factors that go into merchandising, buying, planning, there's just any number of these facets can move on a daily basis. So I think we're kind of used to change, but yeah, it's not a good news story, but it's certainly something we've done before. So let's tackle this head on, and with hopefully a lot of clarity and yeah, no knee-jerk reactions was my hope.
Yeah. Staying positive and hopeful is key to success, and, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
100%. I mean, where are you on the level of an optimist if there's a 0 to a 10?
I'm pretty high. I always have been that way. And I think, as you become a leader in any industry, it becomes very important to be able to stay positive and, be able to keep the people around you feeling good about what they're doing, whether it's the team of people that work directly for you or your cross-functional partners. You have to get people to buy in on whatever you want them to be focused on, and what your strategies are. So, if you're doom and gloom, it's going to be difficult to get a lot of people to come along on the ride with you. So I've always been a pretty big optimist. And,
Amazing.
I think that that's super important in times like this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, actually. Some people would say, oh, don't put blinkers on and be too optimistic. But honestly, you miss the opportunities if you're not optimistic.
Yeah.
You only see how to like shrink and kind of respond in fear. So I love that kind of ethos of bringing the team along with it as well. The transparency helps them get through it and helps them see the opportunities too. Because
Yeah.
it's not just about the leaders that are going to get the whole company through.
Absolutely. I mean, calculated risks are super important, right? Understanding the different options and, like I said, earlier, the contingency plan, opportunities that you have, and being calculated about the risks that you're taking, but being willing to take risks. And someone told me early in my career, to trust your buyer gut. That's, a phrase that's used often is, have a buyer gut or be a true merchant and understand when your gut is telling you to do something and to follow a trend and to, dig in further to something that is changing in your business, and being able to do that and trust yourself to do that. It, takes a little bit of an optimist, risk taking, ability.
Totally, totally. And I think you're right. Some of the best decisions are made when you can tap into that intuition. And intuition is always backed by experience. So when you're using those two things together, it's incredibly powerful. So yeah, I second that.
Yeah.
So, if we are obviously navigating this change, we need to adjust strategies. So let's have a look at that. So adjusting to suit the market, this is what we're talking about. And obviously, we've experienced change before, like we said. So there's rapidly changing consumer needs that we've been adjusting to. There's inflation. We've all been trying to shorten our lead times, get closer to market. And now if we look at the immediate versus the long-term responses of the current changes, personally, if I had to, be in retail at this point, I would go wide before I went deep. It's almost like a retailing philosophy of like when you're unsure, go a bit broader before you narrow in. So I would be taking a lot of information, a lot of data. And I remember a CEO just last week saying to me, she says, I'm fielding 100 opinions from my staff. Like everyone has a different opinion on which way we should go. But Lyndsay, for you, what do you think now in terms of forward-looking strategies for retailers?
I mean, I think it depends on where your brand sits in the marketplace, right? I mean, a luxury brand is going to have a different strategy than maybe a more contemporary brand. But I think, price increases feel inevitable, like we spoke about in the beginning. And, I think that the reality of that has to be taken into account and really be strategically planned, and people need to be focusing on where they want to make those decisions, with ultimately making sure that they're protecting their brand identity, the messaging of the brand, the story that they want to tell. There's so many different levers that, we can look at every day as we're merchandising and planning our assortments. And you need to understand what the previous results were, what your customer was responding to prior, what they're doing today, and how the data is informing the decisions that you're making long term. So, I think that there's probably some allocation, investment opportunities by category that brands will be looking at in place of price changes. Are you looking at costing? You talked about, the 3PL and logistics. I think there's, every facet of what we do and how we drive our businesses is something that kind of needs to be looked at and evaluated and thought about in a different way.
Yeah. It's almost like we say that we evaluate all of those things every time we do a new season plan or review. We look at all of these facets, but a lot of them we let kind of slide. Maybe it's in favor of, I don't know, fashion, or it's in favor of design. Different categories having different margins was sometimes like, well, we should invest more here because there's
Right.
more demand and not enough supply, and there's good margin. And they'll go, the season's not really going that way. And sometimes it's not. But
Right.
I think now more than ever, we're looking at the data to tell us, where should we be going to protect profit because it's under the microscope.
Yeah. I mean, I think margin is, a big focus for everyone as they're talking about tariffs. That's obviously what's driving these price increase conversations, thinking about the cost going up and, having to offset some of that and shift it to your customer. But there are other ways to offset margin. There's, thinking about mix, thinking about, if you're going to increase prices on things that are core items, well, how are you animating them or making them feel different and new and exciting, so that you're getting a different response, or creating an emotional appetite from your customer who is going to come in and see that they're going to have to pay more for something that they've maybe bought every year from you. So I think that there's a lot of ways and a lot of things in terms of how you're thinking about your product strategy that can help offset what you're thinking about from a margin impact and a price increase strategy.
Yeah. I think about also the sad thing about giving up price parity globally on your product, which we might have to do, for the brands, finding it
Yeah.
cheaper in other countries. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is
I mean,
unfortunate
in the
because that
marketplace in
trust.
general. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
it's true.
I mean, I think, not even just like globally, but in the marketplace, wherever you are, I think that in times like this where everybody is going to be taking a different approach potentially, you really need to keep a very close eye on the competition. What is your direct competitor doing? Are they changing prices? Are they relooking at a visual or site merchandising strategy to gain impact of their products? Are they relooking at marketing? Are they marketing differently? Are they, adjusting their customer experience in some way when you visit their locations or when you visit their site? So I think that there's more important than ever to know what your competitors are doing so that you're keeping up and you're not falling behind and you're ahead
Yeah,
of the curve. You're not
totally.
giving up that
I
market share.
mean, getting the market share, it's funny. One of the brands actually is one of their creative. I've been keeping my ear so close to the ground as to like what everyone's doing just to keep informed. But one of the brands said, yeah, we'll absorb the entire cost and we will gain market share from it. That was their strategy. I was like, wow, okay. Everyone's got a different opinion about how it will run. Do you know, I was just thinking, chatting through it with you now, is when we talk about price parity for the same products globally, right? Where we used to go to different cities around the world to shop unique products because Prada would have something unique in the Milan store to what they would have in other, countries. Maybe now more than ever, because the pricing might be different, is the entire assortment might be different in different countries so that you don't have that, oh, I just bought that $500 more expensive than I could have if I'd been somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've done a lot of work on throughout my career, not necessarily globally, because all of the brands that I've worked for are US brands, but even just within the US market, understanding where the key, we call them MSA markets or highly productive areas of the country are, and where you're driving your revenue. And the customers are different, in different areas of even just the US. They want fashion. They're willing to spend more. They are more focused on course. They are more focused on where to work. So understanding whatever your assortment, tiering, distribution strategy is going to be is absolutely fundamentally key in moments like this, because what's the core of retail and assortment planning is having the right product at the right price in the right place at the right time, and making sure that you're telling a story and your customer is receiving it positively. So, that allocation strategy and putting your product in whatever, region or country or state that it should be, and that it will be the most productive is going to be more important than ever. I think people are probably going to be looking at inventory levels too, right? And, thinking about investments and how much you're investing in certain categories. So you might need to make certain categories or, certain key products stretch farther, which then, allocations and distribution becomes super important in those kinds of strategies as well.
So then, Lyndsay, if we talk about, we want to try and predict what the customer is going to do, they will react in certain ways, and we need to try and keep up with that. But how would you, as a brand, try and accelerate to the settling or the new normal of where the consumer is going to be at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think settling into the new normal is something that we, like I said earlier, have all been doing for the past 5 years, right? We had COVID and we all had to figure out what we were going to do during that time with less people, less bandwidth overall, less resources. People, stores closed down, and leaning into our e-commerce sites for direct to consumer businesses. So I think thinking creatively around what channel you're really pushing the pipeline of your product in, how you are repurposing inventory, or how you're thinking about cutting costs in ways other than logistics or resourcing through factories. I mean, there's ways to think about pre-committing to product to gain a little bit on the cost side, booking greige fabrics or materials earlier than you ever have, thinking about trims and how you're not taking down the price authenticity of what your customer expects and the quality that your customers expect, but cutting costs in really creative ways to kind of offset what the impact of the tariffs are going to be. Um, some other things that I've been hearing and reading that people are talking about and thinking about are these surcharges, right? And, kind of pushing the cost of the tariffs on to the customer at the register. I don't know how I feel about that one. I'd love your opinion on that too. I feel like that one could be a little bit hard to swallow. We've seen things
Yeah.
like that happen in the US market, and people don't respond to them very well right away. But then, like anything else, it kind of just becomes something that you know and expect, and you manage
Yeah.
through. I don't think all brands are going to be able to implement something like that, but it's definitely something that I think we're going to start to see in some places in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, just thinking about creatively how you're managing the offset of the margin decreases that could potentially come with tariffs, and protecting the story of your brand and what your customer expects and the experience that your customer expects is the key to success.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also communicating, like you say, to the brand increases trust. And if we're trying to build loyalty in a time like this, nothing better we could do than start to communicate with our brands. No surprises at the cash register just yet. I mean,
Yeah.
let's be open with them. I've seen brands working with their factories, which has been quite inspiring to see how they're, partnering to solve different challenges that they have. But the customer is your other partner in this. And the more you let them in and the more you connect with them, the more chance you have of building loyalty for the long term.
Yeah, such a great point. I think, staying super close to your customer service, clientele, the people that are working in your stores or that are responding to
Yeah.
people who call in from your site is so important. And it's always important, but more important when you're making really big changes in pricing or product strategies, because you need those people to be sharing the same message, and that it's a unified, message to the customer, and it's one that you want them to be sharing. So, it's so simple to share out this is the strategy, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. If
Yeah.
people come in and they're frustrated, please explain, this is what our brand believes in, this is why we're doing it. And having the people who are really the boots on the ground interfacing with the customer, being able to share that message in a very concise, clear way is going to be key when you're making big
So
changes.
true. So true. And then it goes back to what you were saying about connecting with your team and enabling them with the whys behind the
Yeah,
reasons that these things are changing. And if you are able to, in some ways, communicate that with your customer, they may be around for the ride. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
One of the things I think in like a time where profit is so important, and I mean, Lyndsay, we've been in retail a long time. And I do remember the early years of being in retail, and it was the boom, right? I mean, fashion retail, could you have been in a better business? And some of the stories from those times were incredible. But I couldn't help throughout my whole career, right, thinking that growth and sales were always the number one to CEOs, business founders. It was, and you know that silly saying where they say sales is vanity, profit is sanity. Oh, that silly thing.
Yeah.
But it is true, right? And I think
Yeah,
merchants know that more than anyone.
absolutely. I mean, I think that one thing that's super important to think about right now is when you're looking at your revenue line, you want to balance that, right? Nobody is going to give you back your plan for the year at this point. You set a plan number, that's your benchmark. So when you are looking at that and thinking about how you're going to maintain that profit and the gross margin, I think it's important to focus on the dollars and not the rate. So, someone early on in my career taught me that and actually, taught me how to build a blended gross margin plan that was not focused on the rate, but really focused on the dollars that you're taking to the bank. So the rate can
Right.
shift a little bit depending on price changes or the cost of goods that you're selling and how much you're selling in one category versus another. So, I think some people, like I said earlier, might be looking at category mix shifts in order to offset the costs of tariffs.
Yeah.
That is potentially going to shift your margin rate, but could maintain your margin dollars because you'll sell a lot more of those lower price items at a relatively high margin dollar profit. So I think that there are some creative ways of thinking strategically around the financial planning and the assortment planning and how you're looking at your product strategies to really hone in on what the best strategy is to maintain your profit and your revenue at the end of the year.
Yeah. I like that actually. The rate is not as important as the dollars banked because really that is what you're taking to the bank, which is true. But I don't think we've ever done profit modeling to the degree that we're doing it today,
Yeah.
or assortment modeling for that matter. So I guess just for the viewers, we do have some helpful resources for you guys, which we'll just share. So financially modeling the impact of obviously all of these changes across different suppliers, different countries of origin, and different assortments. Style Arcade, if you're on it, you will have a release of a new module next week, which is exciting. So the costing and tariff calculator will be in your hands. And then we also built an Excel model for those that don't have Style Arcade yet, so that you can calculate your tariff impact. Because it's the first thing I wanted to do when I heard about these tariffs. I was like, I need a model to tell me what the impact on margin dollars is going to be for my company based on this change. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful for all of you guys out there doing a million models, because I know that's what we would be doing right now if we were in retail for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's been times over the past 5 years where, or, just in retail in general, everyone's had to look at taking price increases and, how to manage through that and being able to project out what the impact is going to be is so super important. These are fantastic tools. Amazing.
Yeah. Thanks, Lyndsay. Because the thing is, it's not just modeling a scenario. There are multiple scenarios and they're all across time. You
Yeah.
can't just think you can look at it today. It's going to change a million times between today and next week. So you almost have to have it moving with you as you go so that you can forecast. But yeah, there are tools finally to help us do all of these things.
Yeah. Great.
So thinking, Lyndsay, about your teams that would have been modeling this like crazy, obviously, during a time like this. And through tough times, we have leaner teams. And how do we run leaner operations? And I guess, what have you seen that's worked in running leaner operations, and maybe perhaps what you've seen that hasn't worked?
Yeah, I mean, I've I've been around for a long time. I've been in the industry for 20 plus years, so I've seen a lot of different things work and not work. I've been through scenarios of relooking at price increases throughout my career, at every company that I've worked at. And, they're consistently done in Excel and using historical analysis, thinking about how your customer has responded to either a new category or a price change previously, and trying to kind of hone in on that as the benchmark of what will happen if we do this. So I think, running scenarios using a tool like you just showed is super important. And, in COVID specifically, I had a very, very lean team. I was actually a team of one, with obviously planning partners and sales partners at the time, but my entire team was furloughed. And, we were re-looking at all of our inventory that we owned for the next year and how we were going to repurpose that, what we were going to do. So we looked at our fabric ownership, what was dyed, what was printed, what was still in greige, what units were cut, and how were we going to restyle, repurpose, reuse what we already owned, to sell at a later time. And at that time we had no idea when that would be. So that was super interesting, and probably the grayest area that any of us in retail have ever worked
Yeah.
in. And we kind of, and then we had to sell it, right? So we were making these assumptions that we were going to have all this inventory and we were going to rework it and make something that was long sleeve, short sleeve, or make something that was short sleeve, long sleeve, in order to make it seasonally appropriate for the timing that we thought we would be able to sell out again, and then get our partners to buy in on those strategies. So that was a pretty, I think a time that none of us ever hope to ever have to go back to. And I think, like you mentioned in the very beginning of this conversation, is so far off from the impact of what we think these tariffs are going to do to our businesses. So, a really interesting comparison. I think we all have a little bit more control over what we're doing with our businesses, and how we're planning go forward than maybe we realize, because we're in the heat of the moment and no final decisions have really been made on what's going to happen go forward. But I think, knowing what your brand stands for, what you want your customers to receive when they come to your site or your store in terms of the strategy and the story is key. And then being able to hone in on how you are going to impact the product strategy to continue to be profitable alongside that is the most important part. So having contingency plans, having different scenarios of, okay, if the customer doesn't respond to this and we do it, how quickly can we shift back? What does our inventory position need to be? Do we need to keep more inventory in the warehouse, or ship directly from our e-commerce site instead of sending a lot of inventory out into our stores and risk it sitting there and not being responded to, at this new price point that we're going to sell it out at? So I think that there's a lot of kinds of, creative strategies like that in terms of thinking about how you're investing and how you're distributing your product. That is going to be huge in offsetting whatever and mitigating whatever risk that we don't know yet is going to be.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
being able to react quickly if the customer responds in a positive way, because you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. We've all been focusing on shortening those lead times. And I think, Lyndsay, the other part that you probably touched on is that there's almost like we've been given a sort of a blueprint, which is close to a worst case scenario that we can plan for. Whereas when we were in COVID, that unknown time frame was so hard to plan for. But one good thing is that came out of COVID was that the boost in tech for digital enablement was incredible. So there's always, people rallying around the problem to make it better. So I think we're all focused on the same, and we're on the same page. Like, let's improve the situation from all of our different positions. So yeah.
Being able to make those decisions as quickly as possible is going to be so key to success. Trying to do it in Excel pivot tables, like myself and my team had to do in COVID, is not ideal. Not ideal at all.
It's crazy, right? We're lucky, I think, as a founder. I think back to when COVID happened, we were like, gosh, because obviously we're adjacent to fashion. We are going to be impacted by this. And I remember being in New York in February of 2020, and I'd just flown back on the 5th of Feb to Sydney. And, everything locked down straight after that. And what are we going to do now? And so the team, as resourceful as they said, well, we've been working on scoping digital range planning for 6 months. I know it'll take us another 6 months to build, but why don't we try do that in 3? So I think when you do rally the team and they are all behind the mission of like, what if we could do X to improve the situation, then you really do get the most out of everyone.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I love that. It goes back to the being willing to take risks.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah. Data driven,
Yeah.
and also influenced by intuition, but certainly risks. I agree.
Yeah.
Cool. So if we talk about, lean teams need smart tech, obviously, and smarter inventory decisions. And everything that we're doing now is inventory decision making on a global scale and assortment planning across all sorts of different regions with new parameters. So for you, Lyndsay, I guess if we think back to our careers, and this has certainly been true for me, small decisions, seem small at the time, have major cost impacts to the business. And this is why I'm so glad in some ways that we're all focused on profitability finally, because these errors and kind of what sits at that lower level that no one knows really impacts costs for businesses. I mean, you must have seen some examples.
I'm 100%. Very, very early on in my career, I remember we had an allocator who hit the wrong button on the allocation tool when purchasing the sizes of our shorts, and bought like thousands of units of shorts in one size. And we didn't realize that that was happening until the factory reached out to us and said, we're cutting these shorts. And do you know that you have this many thousands of units all in this one size? And we said, no, stop. We need to rework that size break, but that, which they were able to do, and they were able to recut and ship in mostly the correct sizing, but it created delays. We missed the launch of, the spring seasonal business. So there was definitely a pretty big miss to the business because of that one little button push mistake. And I'm saying a button push, it probably was like an Excel spreadsheet that was just, and entered incorrectly and then, transposed incorrectly, because like I said, I've been doing this for about 20 plus years, and we certainly didn't have systems in place that we utilized to place orders at that time. So that's one. I think there's, probably a lot of other examples of things going to the wrong place and the wrong stores, having, things like boots in Florida where the weather never gets higher than 70 degrees, or in Puerto Rico where it certainly doesn't doesn't warrant boot weather ever, or things like that, where just allocation errors and things wind up in the wrong place at the wrong time, or my team didn't communicate to the allocator that something shouldn't be going to one place or another. And those things cost a lot of money because you have to then have the store pack it up, which means someone at the store level is spending time and hours packing and shipping something back to the DC, and then the distribution center has to unpack it all, and then you're missing time of being able to actually sell that product in the right place where it belongs to the right person. So all of those kinds of things are not good, and mistakes that very easily happen when you don't have the right tools or the right communication in place.
Yeah, totally. And I think, Lyndsay, that I remember one, it's a great apparel brand that I can't mention, but the CEO said, any team that is operating on spreadsheets this year, it was 2024. He said, any team in 2024 operating on spreadsheets needs to be offered by the end of the year. That's the mandate. Go and find the tech. It's probably what I would have done as well. It's just there's too many small things that have huge impacts. I remember a retail investor once said to me, he said, thank goodness you're building Starlock. Okay, this was back in the day. He said, because we just had our our merchandise planning, the MFP. He said there was one formula error, and he said it was $6 million of just it was a nightmare. So to lose millions from these small errors is just not worth it. It really isn't.
Yeah.
And then when you enable your team with better tech, then you're all a little bit more informed about all the decisions you're making. And you'll be making a lot, thousands, in fact, we'll be making over the next few months.
Yeah, and there's all this untapped opportunity that's on the table, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest things I'm so passionate about is, not only are looking at buying in the right size and putting it in the right place, because if those things don't happen at point of execution, then my product strategy just, goes by the wayside. And then there's this whole other, okay, somebody, the customer responded really positively to a trend that we didn't expect them to, but how much better could it have been? And, being able to identify those kinds of opportunities and moments is really difficult to get to with an Excel spreadsheet. It's, utilizing a lot of assumptions that, are not always capable from human not every human in a planning function has the capability to do with an Excel spreadsheet.
I know. You have to be a pivot table wizard, really, to get the right results out of that. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so now going on to, we were talking smarter tech, smarter inventory, but we need to get super creative if we're going to navigate these challenges. And Lyndsay, for you, if you think about creative opportunities to start thinking creatively, really, for retailers to begin the shift, anything that you would say they should focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I think focusing on the customer and the customer experience first and foremost, and how your customer is going to respond as you're making any decision in your business is the key to success and the most important thing. So if you are looking at price changes, know your customer, know how they're going to respond, understand what the impact is going to be, build that out, work through the scenarios, assess the risk, and have contingency plans. Another creative thing to think about is assortment mix and, looking at the categories that are currently trending and driving the most revenue of your business and focus on the 80-20, right? If one category is really important and another one is not, and not driving a lot of volume for you right now, then, don't mess with it. Just, focus on the thing and protect the part of the business that you can rely on, and figure out where to get the offset of the costs somewhere else. So if you can increase your prices on your runway product and that would help offset some of the cost of your core, then leave the core alone. That's, driving your business, and that's where your customer is going to continue to come back to. And the rate of sale on something like a runway dress or suit might not change dramatically if you increase the price by $50 or $100. So I would think about category mix alongside price increases, and then just assortment planning. I mentioned it already, but I think, not assortment planning, but distribution strategies. So you might need to hone in on your e-commerce strategy and house more of your product on your website versus shipping to stores, and not, shipping all of your inventory out so that you can react and read and react as quickly as possible once, you make whatever changes you decide for your brand.
Yeah. It's actually interesting because there's no single lever that you could pull to fix everything. And it's all of those micro changes that you need to make. And you have to sit through them. You have to actually go through the pricing architecture, assess it, and reevaluate. And same with color mix, core mix, fashion mix, all the categories, etc. So it sounds like a very tedious process, but that's what retail teams are doing right now. And I think it's smart, because I do think that you will be, those kind of micro assortments will be more and more. I think we're going to be focusing on assorting very particularly to the different regions because of the margin that we leverage from each of them. And I think another creative outcome for one of the brands was mentioning that they had the opportunity to trial, this was a few months ago, actually, I had the opportunity to trial a 3PL in the UK. And so it was a low cost exercise, and they went for it. It was a 68% growth for them in those few months. And they were like, gosh, what an opportunity that we didn't even know about. So I think some of the brands that were already in planning, sort of a few activities, like you say, take a risk, try it out, see if it works for you, because there's a lot of opportunity outside of just the cost cutting and the bringing it internal versus looking external.
Yeah,
So yeah.
it's a balancing act for sure, right? That's what we do, is balance every day. What's working, what's not working, what we need to, go after, what we need to walk away from. It's super important, and I think is going to remain important. It's not something new. It's something that we in retail and as merchants and planners have been doing forever. Just feels a little different with a new impact coming along.
Yeah, totally. And then Lyndsay, actually, and then Lyndsay, let's move on to just Q&A, because I'm aware we're running out of time. There are a couple of questions that I think are burning for people. There are a few here for you. Could you tell me, what about increasing investment in digital channels is one of the questions to further reduce the costs? I'm not sure I know what that means, but maybe you have some ideas there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I was speaking to a little bit earlier in terms of, keeping your product in your distribution center, focusing your breadth and depth of inventory on your e-commerce site versus shipping it all out to stores. So that allows for a little bit more flexibility of how your assortment is showing up. You can, your e-commerce site is your flagship, and you want to make sure you have most, if not all, of your product assortment on your website. And if you have stores, then everything doesn't need to go everywhere, and you don't need to fully ship out all of your inventory. If you do that, you lose a little bit of flexibility to react to where something should go, or to change the price. And if it's sitting in your distribution center and you need to, pull back or change your strategy midstream, then it's certainly easier to do that if it's there in your 3PL than if it's out in stores.
Yeah,
So I think
totally.
I totally agree with that. I think that's a smart move.
Flexibility. And
Mhm.
then if there are SKUs eroding profitability, it says here, what's the best way to phase them out without disrupting your range? Oh, that's key for brands that you would have worked with before. Disrupting the range is a no-go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, 100%. There are brands that have certain products and certain styles that are key to telling the story. So I think you have to determine if something is not a part of the brand story and the brand message, and it's not profitable, then cut the tail. That is something that we do all the time as merchants and buyers. If again goes back to the 80-20 rule that I spoke to earlier, if something is falling in that 20%, it's not important, it's not making you money, and the customer's not responding to it, then let it go. Don't even, spend time and energy on it. Or figure out if it's something that isn't you think is important or could be an emerging trend, figure out how to message it to your customer in a different way. So whether that means you need to place it differently on your sales floor or on your website, you need to market it differently. There's a lot of different creative angles that you can take with something like that. But I would say for the most part, something's not doing what it's supposed to, it's not carrying its weight, then you have to let it go.
Yeah, totally. You know what's interesting though, if we think about the fact that the industry's operated on spreadsheets for the longest time, what we don't see is all the nuances of so the product is a poor performer. We all know that, we all agree. But why? Why is it a poor performer? Is it because we sized it wrong? Is it because we merchandise it incorrectly in store? Is it because on site it's really not performing? There's hardly any imagery up about it, no video, all of that kind of thing. There's so many different angles to why a product could not be performing, that it's almost like we have to get into the detail now. Finally, we have to get into the detail and understand that, because every single dollar of profit counts. So yeah.
100%. 100%.
Okay, amazing.
Can't get
Lyndsay,
lost in the detail though. It's very easy as merchants and
oh
planners to
gosh,
get
yes.
lost
Please,
in the weeds of the data and the numbers and the detail and
yeah. So maybe we should caveat this for everyone listening. Please get lost in the detail of planning your assortments by region very carefully to categories, price points, all of those good facets. Please don't get lost in the detail on the things that really don't matter. That 80-20 principle is essential, because you will spin your wheels. And I think the other thing, Lyndsay, is if we could find more time in our day and start to use AI, and actually that's one of the questions here, is like, how are brands using AI and technologies to potentially automate more and reduce operational costs?
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's a scary top of mind topic outside of tariffs for a lot of merchants and planners right now, because AI is so important in the marketplace, and it's emerging, and it's moving fast. And I think people are nervous about, what does that mean to me and to my job and to my team, and how am I going to function if there's AI that's going to come in and make all of these decisions? And I think that there's, in my entire career, always been this miss of that white space to think creatively, to have more time to build on strategies, to be out in stores, in the marketplace, interfacing with the customer one-on-one, shopping what my competitors are doing, and all of that white space that not spending time in spreadsheets and pivot tables, digging into data, allows for, is, I think, key to a lot of businesses growing and changing and evolving in ways that they've been trying to for a long time, some of them.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I actually think this question seemed to come from a place of fear, as I read it. But if you think about it, technology, if you'll allow it, this is my opinion, if you'll allow it, makes you the hero. So like when our team brings in tech and they say, this is awesome, I've tried it out, look at the change it's made in my role, we're all for it. And that person becomes a hero because they've just changed everyone's role. And you're right, like we've got all of these smart merchandise minds buried in spreadsheets, which is just crazy. If I think about the talent that I've worked with before, it's what I'd hoped most for them, is like, let's all get out of spreadsheets and be strategic. Yeah. So yeah. Lyndsay, thank you so much. There are actually a few questions that we have not answered. We will have to do that after the session. We're running out of time. But is there one takeaway that you would like to leave with us today? Anything from today's conversation, actually?
I mean, I think just the balancing act conversation, and really focusing on staying positive, knowing that what you're doing today to balance your strategies and your assortment planning, assessing risk, thinking about your business. This is what we do every day. So, think about it that way. This is just another, challenge in the business that everyone is going to have to tackle in different ways. And make sure you focus on what your customer needs and wants. The customer experience at the end of the day is the most important part to your brand success. So if you're doing something that is not right for your customer or your brand story, then you're not going to be successful. So, keep that top of mind.
Totally. That's great. Thank you so much. And I just also want to give everyone a way to contact you. You're the same as me. I prefer contact on LinkedIn and welcome it. So if anyone wants to get in touch, I presume, Lyndsay, you'll be open to more questions if they have. And we've got a number to answer after the show. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. And Lyndsay, thank you for all of your insights. Incredible.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful. Super
Absolute
fun.
pleasure. You'll have to come again. Amazing. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.